Morning blessings. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on our panel today. I am genuinely so thankful and grateful to share this work in progress with you. And welcome to Theoretical Nutrient Cycling on Composting Liberatory Movement Work Rooted in Benevolent Colonialism. And I do want to clarify again, this is a work in progress. And I'm really excited to get into this with you and discuss any of this further and answer any questions that you may have if you email me. I'm going to begin by inviting you to, if you feel comfortable, close your eyes, maybe stretch, maybe take a sip of water, something that feels comfortable for you, as comfortable as possible in this moment, given the very difficult nature of the topics that we're discussing today. And as you take some moments to take some intentional breaths, I'm going to read a quote for you from Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses by Robin Wall Kimmerer. When you draw a breath of air, it is pulled deep and then deeper into your lungs, down tiny branching pathways, closer and closer to the bloodstream which is waiting for the oxygen it carries. In the alveoli, your breath is but a single cell away from your blood. The cells are glistening and wet so that the oxygen may dissolve and pass over. Through this thin watery film, deep in the lungs, our bodies become continuous with the atmosphere, for better and for worse. Now I'm going to slowly lead us into my agenda. I'm going to open with a Petakucha epigraph. Then I'm going to share a clip from a presentation called Lenape, Cultural Continuity and Connection. Then I'm going to get into some information about Rikers Island in the past and in the present. Though, of course, we're always living in this transhistorical moment, as Torkwasi Dyson said. Then we're going to get into some theoretical nutrients for composting, Rikers-centric abolition ecologies, and of course, it's going to be a non-exhaustive list of source materials that I'm referencing for this. Now, as I get into this Pechakucha, I'm going to explain, as it says on the screen here, that it is a Japanese storytelling and idea sharing method featuring 20 slides presented for 20 seconds each with accompanying concise image commentary. This is going to be a great moment for you to really sit, intentionally breathe, and just witness the images and make note of, think about, contemplate the accompanying image commentaries that I'm going to be providing for each image. Nearly 100 years ago, Rikers Island was expanded into a landfilled biohazard full of toxins, garbage, organic waste, and construction materials. Today, Rikers Island is an urban heat island and penal colony full of human rights violations, environmental degradation, and numerous conditions of possibility for violence and death. Rikers Island's poisoned soils, like abundant soil kin who live on and with our shared planetary homebody, are born of ancient stone kin. The parents of soils are sacred, lithic elders. Compost helps nourish and offer nutrients to our soils. The heat is made possible by billions of multiple species of worms, bacteria, microarthropods, and more microbial kin who live with, on, and within our shared planetary home body. quote, humans, unquote, play a minor role in the decomposition process with respect to compost. If unburdened by colonial, carceral, capitalist violence, our decomposer kin would heal and nourish our soils without the need for human intervention. Composting on stolen land is a form of violence. Waste materials are embedded in all natural cycles, including the ongoing travel and exchange of water molecules between the planet's water bodies, the land, and the atmosphere, precipitation, evaporation, groundwater, etc. Lenapehoking is a colonized land of swampy marshlands. The islands are connected by sacred, polluted waters. Billions of gallons of raw sewage are pumped into the sacred waters of Lenapehoking every year. In the 1600s, fresh water sources were polluted by people disposing of their garbage in water bodies, such as Collect Pond. In 1991, skeletal remains were found 30 feet below sea level near the area of the historic Collect Pond. That area is now a National Historic Landmark called the African Burial Ground. The largest public burial ground in the U.S. settler state, Hart Island, was once worked by incarcerated Rikers comrades who dug the graves. Many of the people buried on Hart Island were abandoned babies born addicted to crack and with HIV/AIDS. Hundreds of people have been killed as a result of violence on Rikers Island, whether they are killed in custody or if they die by suicide. Khalif Browder should still be alive. Khalif Browder was a victim of carceral and colonial violence. Rikers Island killed Khalif Browder. Khalif Browder should still be alive. Renewable Rikers is a project rooted in benevolent colonialism. The campaign to close Rikers needs to collaborate with the Land Back movement. New York City does not need new jails. New York City needs guidance from Lenape relatives and to give the land back. The prison abolition movement needs to collaborate with the Land Back movement. We all have a role to play and freedom to actualize for ourselves alongside our abundant, diverse kin with whom we share our planetary homebody. And now, the clip from Lenape, Cultural Continuity and Connection.
Our original homelands, what we now call Lenape is means the land of the Lenape or the place of the Lenape. It is the eastern seaboard stretching from western Connecticut to Delaware. It encompassed the Delaware and Hudson River valleys, so all of eastern Pennsylvania, pretty much to the Susquehanna River, and all of New Jersey, parts of northern Delaware, western Massachusetts, all of New York City, and Long Island, those areas. Actually, when it comes to Long Island, we inhabited about half of that island, and then you had the uh, Shinnecock, who inhabited the other half. Uh, our our areas of settlements ranged all the way up to Albany in New York as well. So it's a large expanse of land that we had many villages and communities throughout these areas. So the rivers and estuaries were vital to our economy and culture at the time of pre-contact. 16,000 plus years is what we are known to have been in this area. We have stories that were passed down that we did come from the West at some point, but that is also would have been previous to that 16,000 years. So I know I get a lot of people who say, well, those people weren't necessarily Lenape. They're our ancestors. They are who came to the area and they are who helped to develop our Lenape culture. So our culture was developed around these rivers and creeks and estuaries. The rivers themselves provide transportation and trade routes. They hold a lot of significance to our people still to this day. And most of us ended up in places where there aren't huge rivers like the Hudson River or the Delaware River. So, one of the things that we do when we come back is we often reconnect with these areas, these rivers, and the the ways that we had about those rivers and the stories and traditions. We try to reconnect with those things as we when we return.
Now let's get into a brief history of Rikers Island. It was, quote, purchased in 1664 by Abraham Riken, and then it was purchased by the city in 1884. You'll see on a future slide an arena channel that I have dedicated to a lot of archival materials that talk a lot more about what was happening materially on Rikers Island during this late 1800s time. This was the 9th New York Infantry Training Ground during the Civil War. And I'll just add that many of the other islands that make up Lenapehoking were also not only infantry training grounds, but also did become spaces where there were jails or prison sites, and also, as I'll get into later, landfilling endeavors, like is still happening today, since about 20% of the land mass in Lenapehoking, and specifically so-called New York City, is landfilled. So the New York City Commission of Charities and Corrections was wondering for a very long time, are we going to make this land a workhouse or a jail? We now know what they decided on. When refuse, garbage, etc., waste was no longer being dumped into waterways, it was sent to Rikers Island to be landfilled. And this is a bit different than the actual expansion of the island itself. It was expanded about 40 times its original landmass size with the help of crib work, where they were bringing in construction debris, etc. But then towards the early 19th century, and that's when they started bringing much more organic waste, toxic waste, etc., onto the island to actually landfill on the island itself, not just to expand the landmass. When New York's World Fair was going on, Robert Moses decided to start sending trash to Staten Island instead of Rikers Island because around this time there was so much toxic waste on Rikers Island that you could see explosions from the mainland that were happening on Rikers Island. Now, Blackwell, aka Roosevelt Island Jail, closed around the time that Rikers Island Correctional opened. And as I said before, the landmass expands from 90 acres to 415 acres with the help of trash. And as mentioned before, it's an island of decades of human rights violations, colonial, carceral violence. Now, as we move forward, what are we doing with this island, especially as we're talking about closing Rikers, allegedly, by next year, the end of next year? What is Renewable Rikers and what is the Close Rikers campaign? We're going to get more into this as I move forward. These are some archival photos of Rikers Island in the 1930s. And as you can see, these are heaps of garbage and also decomposing organic matter just mixed together on the island. And then these are just some more archival photographs showing just more heaps of garbage that were around the island. Now, for decades, there have been countless articles written about exactly the kinds of violence going on Rikers Island. Yes, there's violence from COs, and also Rikers Island is an environmental justice, a climate justice catastrophe, given the pollution, the heat, the flooding, and this history that we're now discussing. As mentioned before, these are my arena channels that I have where I have been archiving all sorts of things related to the history of Rikers Island and Rikers Island present. The one on the far left is an arena channel I made specifically for this talk. Then I have one on torture and abuse on Rikers Island. I have so much information about Compostkin and the borough-based jails project that is currently in progress. And I recommend you going there if you're interested in reading any of my resources, learning more about any of these things in depth. There's pictures, photos, essays, books, artworks, etc., all related to this intersection between climate justice and abolition. Now, here I have an excerpt from Fermenting Feminisms by Lauren Fournier, and I'm going to go ahead and read that to you. She says, I theorize the possibilities of fermentation, or the process of microbial transformation, as a material practice and metaphor through which to approach feminist theory and practice today to reimagine feminism's relevance to human and more than human lives. In particular, I propose 10 ways in which fermentation is a ripe conceptual framework for articulating trans-inclusive, anti-racist feminisms. What I'm trying to do here with this work in progress is argue that composting is also a ripe conceptual framework, specifically for talking about how we can take abolition ecologies and merge them with anti-colonial frameworks and theories. Why is this important? These are direct quotes from the Renewable Rikers website that state their goals, which state to ensure that the island's future uses, benefit, and respond to the wishes of the people and communities that have been harmed through its long, painful history. Use the island for green infrastructure. Transfer the land for a positive use. Use 400 acres for the benefit of communities that have borne the brunt of mass criminalization, environmental burdens, and disinvestment. Transfer Rikers Island from the control of the Department of Correction to other agencies for green infrastructure uses as outlined in the Renewable Rikers Act. And develop renewable energy, food scrap and yard waste composting, and wastewater treatment infrastructure on Rikers Island. Now, I keep using the phrase benevolent colonialism throughout this, and now I'm going to define what that is as per Dr. Max Baron from Pollutionist Colonialism. And it's really naming that the relationship of such a promiscuous use of decolonization with the definitions of colonialism above. It means settler and colonial access to indigenous land, concepts like decolonization and indigenization, and life worlds to advance settler and colonial goals, even if they are benevolent ones, especially benevolent ones. Probably not what was intended. Above, Tuck and Yang's decolonization is not a metaphor is cited. And I do want to name that I also recommend reading Slavery is a Metaphor, which is an incredible critique of the Tuck and Yang piece, which is also necessarily a part of this conversation. And you can find that linked in the Arena channel that I have that is titled the same as this presentation. A bit more on benevolent colonialism. It says again, people do not have to be jerks to maintain and reproduce colonial relations. They can have benevolent environmental goals. They can be working to solve important scientific questions. If land relations are colonial, the solutions, initiatives, and studies that flow from those relations will also be colonial. Hence, why I believe the Renewable Rikers campaign needs to center anti-colonial frameworks as they're moving forward and collaborate with the land back movement. I have another quote here. This is an excerpt. While abolition ecology's literature recognizes this logic of criminalization, its implications for understanding carceral power as a genocidal project remain underexplored. This oversight is particularly significant because it complicates how we conceptualize the settler state's role in abolitionist ecological struggle, raising a productive friction. To what extent, if at all, should we engage the settler state in ecological struggle when the criminalization of indigenous land relations is itself a tool of genocidal nation building? And centering indigenous dispossession puts pressure on any notion of a unified we and reshapes how liberatory futures are theorized. It pushes us to expand modern categories that define what is at stake in ecological struggle, particularly in framing abolition politics as a more than human arena. Another central text is Mapping Abundance for a Planetary Future. Here's another excerpt for you. I see these conditions of cartographic depletion replicated again and again in Hawaii and in other indigenous places in the world. The corporate manufacturing of wastelands through the processes of exhausted settler colonial cartographies. We saw this with the Lenapehoking carceral archipelago, specifically, as I'm naming here, in Rikers Island, as this toxic penal colony. There's also a great primer on Rikers as a toxic penal colony made by the Freedom Agenda in the Arena channel that I mentioned before with the same title as this presentation. Now, another excerpt from Fugitive Justice that I feel like really sums up what I'm trying to encourage us to think about as we're talking about abolition ecologies, theorizing about abolition ecologies, and collaborating with anti-colonial frameworks and theories. If what has been done cannot be undone, then the forms of legal and social compensation available are less a matter of wiping the slate clean than of embracing the limited scope of the possible in face of the irreparable, and calling attention to the incommensurability between pain and compensation. How does one compensate for centuries of violence that have as their consequence the impossibility of restoring a prior existence, of giving back what was taken, of repairing what was broken? I'm going to leave us here on this slide. I want to thank you so much for being with us on this panel. I am really looking forward to expanding this work in progress into a paper. And I want to name that this is a project that I refuse to do alone. I work in Rikers Island myself. I teach art workshops, I teach poetry workshops, and I teach emotional skills building workshops, as well as professional development. And I work mainly with women in the trans community that are in Rikers, that are captive in Rikers. And it is with them that I'm learning more about how to approach this. I'm also a member of Freedom Agenda, who is one of the organizations who are leading the campaign to close Rikers. And I believe that none of this can be done outside of conversation with my neighbors, with my relatives. I've been in the process of reaching out to people who are descendants of people from Lenapehoking, people who are displaced, and people who are still trying to come back and who are still waiting to get their land back. And that is partly why I presented this presentation the way that I did. There is still so much work to be done. There are still so many questions that I have. There is so much that I do not know. There is so much that I myself am learning as a descendant of displaced and enslaved Indigenous Africans who were stolen and brought here onto the stolen land. So again, I thank you. I look forward to discussing this with you further if you're interested. And again, land back, close Rikers, and abolition now.